Some men ruin their strength not with failure, but with their tongue. They don't fall in silence, they collapse in conversation. It's not the world that exposes them. It's the words they carelessly repeat, phrases soaked in insecurity, disguised as honesty or humility. And the worst part, they think no one notices. But everyone does. The Stoics warned us, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. So, when a man keeps saying the same weak things, he's not just speaking, he's signaling. And those signals? They tell the world exactly who to dismiss, who to overlook, and who to control. This isn't a lecture, it's a mirror. Because every man has said something that chipped away at his own power. Today, we expose 6 phrases that make any man look weak instantly, and what a Stoic man chooses to say instead. If you've ever heard these words come out of your mouth or another man's, don't ignore the feeling in your gut. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment. I choose strength over sound. Because true power doesn't shout, it chooses what it says carefully. Now, let's dive in. Phrase 1. I can't help it. That's just how I am. He stood at the edge of the meeting room, arms crossed, staring out the window like he was waiting for the world to finally recognize his pain. The room had gone silent after he'd snapped at a colleague who questioned his decision. And then, with a shrug and a voice coded in resignation, he muttered the phrase that ended the conversation and every ounce of respect in the room. That's just how I am. It landed like a confession, not of truth, but of weakness. He wasn't explaining, he was escaping. That sentence didn't reflect maturity, it reflected the mental sloppiness of a man who had stopped trying, a man who used his personality as a shield against growth. And the worst part, he believed it made him authentic. But authenticity without effort is just inertia dressed up as identity. Stoic philosophy has no room for this. The Stoics didn't speak of comfort zones or personality types. They spoke of daily discipline, deliberate evolution, and the relentless pursuit of mastery over one's impulses. Epictetus didn't say, accept who you are. He said, no man is free who is not master of himself. In other words, if you're not fighting your nature, you're being ruled by it. Men who say, that's just how I am, are men who've stopped sharpening the blade. They confuse familiarity with truth. But just because a behavior is comfortable doesn't mean it's worthy. Just because it feels natural doesn't make it noble. Real strength is uncomfortable. It requires confession, not to the world, but to the mirror. It's the moment you say, this isn't working, and I refuse to stay broken just because I've been this way for years. I once knew a man in his 50s who blamed his temper on being a product of his generation. He'd bark at his wife, intimidate his son, dismiss feedback at work. And when challenged, he doubled down not with humility, but with the proud declaration of someone who believed the past excused the present. But over time, something changed. A health scare, a son who stopped calling, a grandchild born he never met. One day, he looked me in the eye and said, I always thought I was being real. Turns out, I was just being lazy. That man became the most disciplined version of himself in his final years, not because he wanted applause, but because he was tired of being a prisoner to his own habits. That's what Stoicism calls us toward. Not self-acceptance that leads to decay, but self-awareness that demands evolution. The next time that phrase creeps into your throat, stop. Ask yourself, am I protecting something that should have been buried long ago? Because the man who justifies his weakness with identity is not a man defending himself. He's a man quietly surrendering. Let's move to the next phrase, and this one's louder but equally empty. Phrase 2. It's not fair. Did you know that the word fair doesn't even appear in most ancient Stoic writings. Not because injustice didn't exist, but because the concept was irrelevant to strength. Life as it is owes no one a clean path. The Stoics didn't waste breath begging the world to balance itself. They didn't lean on fairness as a moral currency. They understood what many men today still struggle to accept. Nature is indifferent, and fate does not ask for permission. When a man says, "It's not fair," what he's really saying is, "I want the rules changed because I don't want to adjust." It's the modern cry of helplessness wrapped in moral complaint. But the universe doesn't speak the language of fairness. It speaks the language of consequence, cause, response. What you plant, you may not reap. What you lose, you may not deserve. Still, it is yours to carry. A man rooted in Stoicism doesn't plead with the sky when hardship strikes. He steadies his breath. He anchors his thoughts. Marcus Aurelius, who governed during plague, war, and betrayal, never once carved a line into his journal asking for justice. What he wrote instead were reminders to endure, to remain still inside chaos, to do his duty whether praised or punished. That was his compass, not fairness, but fortitude. And here's what men must understand. Complaining about fairness doesn't inspire change. It signals fragility. It tells the world you expect to be rescued, not relied upon. It doesn't earn respect, it erodes it. The wise man accepts that pain and privilege are unevenly distributed, that good men suffer, that cruel men sometimes succeed. But none of it changes this. You are still responsible for how you meet the world. That is where power lives, in response, not complaint. So, the next time you're tempted to say, "It's not fair," stop yourself. Reframe it. Ask instead, "What is this moment requiring of me?" That shift from resentment to responsibility is where weak men fall and strong men rise. Because in the eyes of the Stoic, fairness isn't promised, but self-respect. That's built in how you respond when it isn't. Phrase 3, "I don't care." Few phrases reveal inner collapse faster than this one. It rolls off the tongue like armor, but beneath it is often nothing but disconnection. Men repeat it to sound composed, even dominant, when in truth, it often signals defeat. It's not strength, it's surrender in disguise. "I don't care" has become the anthem of the emotionally fatigued. The man who once showed up, spoke up, and stood tall now shrinks behind indifference. He's been told that to be stoic is to feel nothing, to remain untouched by the world, so he misinterprets it. He believes that detachment means numbness. But that's not Stoicism, that's apathy. And apathy, contrary to popular belief, isn't power, it's decay. There's a subtle but deadly shift when "I don't care" becomes a default response. At first, it's used to avoid conflict. Then, it's used to avoid effort. Eventually, it becomes a mantra used to avoid life itself. And that's the danger. The more a man repeats those words, the more he trains his mind to disengage from joy, from pain, from people, from purpose. But a stoic man doesn't escape life. He enters it with discipline and presence. He doesn't need to announce his distance from chaos. He simply does not let chaos own him. And there is a massive difference between those two things. When a man says, "I don't care," he's often trying to appear emotionally bulletproof. But real stoic discipline isn't about pretending to be a robot. It's about refining what you feel, not ignoring it. It's about using your emotional response as data, not as a directive. You process, you integrate, you act with clarity, not with reaction. Seneca said, "A gem cannot be polished without friction." And that's what feelings are, friction. They scrape against the rough edges of our ego. They challenge us to understand, to slow down, to ask deeper questions. And when embraced properly, that friction doesn't break you, it shapes you. Numbness, on the other hand, does the opposite. It doesn't polish, it dulls. It corrodes. A man who feels nothing may appear calm, but inside, he's fading. He becomes ineffective, disconnected from himself, a shell mistaken for a sage. When "I don't care" becomes your answer to everything, you stop protecting what matters. You stop showing up in relationships. You stop standing for anything that costs energy. You abandon your opinions, your standards, your values, not because they don't exist, but because you're too worn down or too afraid to defend them. The Stoics didn't teach emotional denial, they taught emotional mastery. Epictetus said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the view they take of them." That means we must change our lens, not shut our eyes. We don't grow by checking out, we grow by engaging wisely. So, the next time you feel that bitter impulse rise up to say, "I don't care," pause. Step back. Ask yourself, what am I avoiding? What would it mean if I allowed myself to care deeply, but acted with control, not chaos? That's the mark of a man who is present, not one who hides behind apathy, like a shield. Let others wear detachment like a mask. You choose precision. Choose grounded awareness. Because in a world that's busy pretending not to feel, the Stoic man remains fully alive, measured, not muted. Now, let's move forward. The next phrase reveals not avoidance, but deep, unspoken self-doubt. And the moment it slips out, you've already lost command of your own narrative. Let's expose it. Phrase 4. Whatever. At first, it sounds stoic, detached, calm, like a man who has made peace with the universe. But more often than not, it's just resignation dressed up in philosophy. This phrase is not always acceptance, it's a lazy surrender. A man who keeps saying, "Whatever happens, happens," is usually no longer steering his life. He's floating, and eventually he's drowning. True Stoicism isn't passive, it's the exact opposite. It's active alignment with what is in your control and graceful acceptance of what isn't. It doesn't say, "Let the chips fall where they may," and walk away. It says, "I will do my part with excellence, and when the rest is beyond me, I will let it be without complaint." There's a difference between surrender and abandonment. Let me tell you about Ron. He was a father of 3, worked construction, didn't say much, but you could tell when something was eating at him. After 20 years of marriage, his wife told him she was done, not angry, not loud, just done. She'd been lonely for years, and he hadn't noticed. Or maybe he had, but didn't move. When I asked what happened, Ron shrugged and muttered, "Whatever happens, happens." He didn't chase her, didn't fight for the kids, didn't check in weeks later, just clocked back into work the next morning like nothing shattered. That wasn't strength. That was a man so used to watching things break around him, he stopped believing anything could be fixed. And that's the danger of this phrase when used without awareness. It becomes a way to avoid accountability, to pretend you're stoic when you're really scared of engaging. It allows a man to step out of the arena of life while still convincing himself he's centered. But that's not equanimity, it's apathy. Marcus Aurelius didn't say, "Whatever happens, happens." He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. The Stoic doesn't avoid the battlefield of life. He stands firm in it, knowing some outcomes will be bitter, but he fights anyway. He gives life his full effort, not for guarantees, but for honor. The man who hides behind whatever happens becomes forgettable, passive, a man without shape. Because what defines a man is not that everything goes his way, but that even when it doesn't, he moved like it mattered. The world doesn't need more detached bystanders. It needs conscious operators, men who don't hand their fate to the wind and then call it wisdom. The Stoic accepts fate, yes, but he does so after doing everything in his power with discipline, clarity, and strength. So, when something in your life begins to fall apart, a job, a relationship, a sense of purpose, don't reach for this phrase like a security blanket. Ask yourself, have I truly done what is mine to do? If the answer is no, you're not being stoic, you're being avoidant. You're calling surrender what is actually silence. And silence, when it's rooted in fear, is not virtuous, it's corrosive. If you're going to accept what happens, make sure it's after you've acted like a man who deserves something better. That's stoic composure. Anything less is just quitting with better vocabulary. Let's move to the next phrase, one that sounds strong, but drains your strength the moment it leaves your lips. Ready? Phrase 5. She won't let me. Of all the phrases a man can speak, few are as quietly corrosive as this one. She won't let me. It may sound innocent, even polite, but beneath those 4 words lies the surrender of a man's autonomy, the slow erosion of his identity, and the alarming reality that he's no longer living his life, but asking for permission to exist in it. Now, this isn't about being controlling. It's not about dominance or authority over another human being. Stoicism rejects tyranny. This is about something far more important: agency, the right to make decisions that align with your principles, your purpose, your values. And when a man gives that up, not for love, but for approval, he loses more than freedom. He loses his spine. I once knew a man named Derek, smart, capable, had dreams of building his own consulting business after years of grinding for someone else's success. He'd saved, prepared, studied the market. Everything was lined up. But one day, I asked how the launch was going, and he just shrugged. She won't let me, he said, eyes darting to the ground. She thinks it's too risky. Let that sink in. A grown man, fully equipped to face the world, holding back his destiny because someone else didn't approve. He wasn't in a cage, but he had built one out of silence, compromise, and the illusion of keeping the peace. What he thought was partnership had quietly become permission-seeking. And the longer he lived that way, the smaller he became, not just in her eyes, but in his own. Stoic philosophy doesn't teach rebellion for rebellion's sake. It teaches self-governance. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. But if you hand over that power bit by bit, excuse by excuse, you become a shell of the man you were meant to be." When a man says, "She won't let me," what he's really saying is, "I'm too afraid to disappoint her," or worse, "I've confused love with submission." And once that line is crossed, once you start seeking permission instead of communicating direction, the dynamic shifts. You become easier to control, more compliant, less respected. Because even if she loves you, she won't admire you. Why? Because a woman can love comfort, but she admires conviction. A stoic man doesn't demand obedience. He cultivates alignment. He invites harmony, but he never trades his principles for peace. He understands that love isn't supposed to cost you your fire. It's meant to support it. If your partner adds fear to your decision-making instead of courage, something is already broken, and it's not your ambition. Too many men shrink inside relationships that feel safe but spiritually suffocating. They start using words like can't and won't, and maybe later, when what they really mean is, "I no longer believe I have the right to act without approval." But here's the Stoic truth. You don't need approval to be who you are. You don't need applause to pursue what calls you. You need alignment between your values and your actions. That's what keeps your integrity alive. So, If you've ever caught yourself saying, "She won't let me," stop. Reframe it. Ask, "What would I do if I weren't afraid to be misunderstood?" Then do that not recklessly, but righteously. A man who lives by his values may be questioned. A man who lives by permission will eventually be ignored. And when that day comes, when you realize that your life has been shaped more by avoidance than authenticity, you'll wish you had stood up sooner. Don't wait for that moment. Lead kindly, firmly, without asking. Phrase 6. That's above my pay grade. Here's an uncomfortable truth. The average man hears over 100,000 words per day, but some of the most damaging are the ones he speaks to himself in defeat. One of the most deceptively dangerous. That's above my pay grade. On the surface, it sounds humble, practical, even mature. But in reality, this phrase often disguises something far more corrosive: cowardice. It's not humility. It's self-limiting behavior wrapped in sarcasm, a resignation speech whispered before the battle even begins. The man who constantly says, "That's above my pay grade," isn't just avoiding responsibility. He's publicly declaring that he has no intention of growing, no ambition to stretch, no courage to enter difficult rooms or speak up when the stakes are high. He would rather be small and safe than bold and bruised. That's not wisdom. That's fear with a smile on its face. Stoicism doesn't coddle this mindset. It condemns it. Marcus Aurelius didn't write volumes of self-reflection to remind himself of what he couldn't do. He wrote to remind himself of what must be done, even when it terrified him. "You must build up your life action by action," he said, "and be content if each one achieves its goal as far as possible." Seneca was even more direct. It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that things are difficult. A man who believes he's unqualified to handle more, lead more, or grow beyond his station will never rise because he's already put a ceiling over his head and called it realism. The danger of this phrase isn't just personal, it's cultural. In every group, in every organization, the men who shrink from duty create a vacuum. And someone always fills that vacuum. Often, it's not the man with integrity or vision. It's the man with ego and noise. If you refuse to rise, you open the door for someone unworthy to lead. Silence isn't neutral, it's a vote. And make no mistake, the Stoic man is not some emotionless robot. He is simply clear-eyed enough to know that life will throw complexity at him, whether he feels ready or not. The question is never, "Am I qualified?" The question is, "Am I willing?" Willing to try, willing to fail, willing to face ridicule, challenge, pressure, and remain steady, not because he has the answers, but because he refuses to look away from the questions. Epictetus taught, difficulties show a man's character. Not his status, not his comfort zone, his character. The man who always bows out of big decisions, who ducks behind jokes or job titles, is not being modest, he's protecting his ego. And eventually, that ego will become a cage he can't grow beyond. Real strength doesn't wait for promotion. It proves itself before the title is handed out. And real leadership doesn't come from being told what to do. It comes from being the one who steps up before being asked. So, if you find yourself about to say, "That's above my pay grade," pause. Ask yourself what you're really trying to avoid. Is it complexity or is it accountability? Because the man who refuses to engage with hard problems is the same man who wonders years later why no one ever saw his worth. A Stoic doesn't wait to be given permission to be great. He assumes responsibility not because he's sure he'll succeed, but because he knows that stepping up, even imperfectly, is the only path to becoming a man of consequence. And as Marcus Aurelius reminded us, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Conclusion: let's not kid ourselves. Words shape men. Not just the loud ones, not just the ones spoken in boardrooms or arguments, but the quiet, automatic phrases we mutter without thinking. I can't help it. It's not fair. She won't let me. These aren't just weak statements. They're signals. Signals that say, I've given up control of my life. And here's the Stoic truth. What you allow to leave your mouth reveals what you've allowed into your mind. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Rewrite your language, and you begin rewriting your direction. As Marcus Aurelius said, you become what you give your attention to. So, give your attention to strength, to discipline, to precision. And leave behind the soft, slippery phrases that made you small. If this video made you pause even once, don't waste that clarity. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. I speak with strength because I think with clarity. Because a man's voice doesn't just travel through the world, it echoes back into who he becomes. Choose words that build the man you respect, the man the world can't shake.